Here we are with Ubi Tennis and with somebody who was only #1 in the world, even if he was a little bit unlucky because it was before the ATP computer started to work, but everybody thought and knew that he was the real #1 in the world. It's Mr. Stan Smith, president of the Hall of Fame. He won 2 slams. He should have won more, but he will tell us about it. And welcome, Stan. Thanks for joining us. And thanks also to Steve Flink, who hasn't won any title, but is almost as famous.
Well, he's in the Hall of Fame, so that's the key thing. One of the special journalists that's in the Hall of Fame.
Yes, and I'm very proud to have an Hall of Famer with me. Two Hall of Famers. I'm the only one really, unknown, but I try my best to impress the people. And I would like to start to impress Stan Smith because before talking about, I should introduce him as a winner of 2 slams, as a winner of 7 Davis Cup. Including one when he beat Italy in San Francisco, which was, we didn't win a set in San Francisco in 79, I think, yes. And well, we don't even know exactly how many titles you won because 54 doubles, they say. In singles, 36 with the ATP, but many more before the ATP or before the Tennis Open. So do you know how many you won it?
I don't know exactly. I think it's about 100.
You're a centennial. Bud Collins in his encyclopedia is saying Stan Smith is one of the few centennial who won more than 100 tournaments.
Yeah, I think it was like 39 singles and 61 doubles. That was the number I had, but I'm not sure. Some of those are, they weren't ATP events and that sort of thing. So I don't know.
It gets complicated to you, Baldi. You know that because Stan playing in the amateur era, crossing over into open tennis, and different people counting different tournaments, but he won more than his share. And I want to say, Stan, that you're not the first great player that Ubaldo has said should have won more. So don't take offense to that.
I think every player would say that. I just saw the other day, I've been going through the last few weeks about memorabilia, photographs and clippings and that sort of thing. And I guess when I was inducted, they had me winning, I was in 17 finals of majors. 1 mixed doubles final, which I totally forgot about with Rosie Casals.
Yeah.
But so I won 7 out of 17, I guess, was the bottom line.
And you did, and that of course was at a time, Stan, when the top singles players were playing doubles. So those doubles majors meant more in a certain sense. I mean, and they meant more to you, right? I mean, you put a lot of effort into the doubles.
Well, yeah, everybody played singles and doubles until Borg and Connors came along, and that's when things started going more singles oriented. But basically, it was just normal that you'd enter singles and doubles and play, and a lot of the players played mixed doubles in the majors, which I didn't do too many times. But I wasn't a very good mixed doubles player. But I did enjoy playing the doubles, which was fun.
Well, I must say, I'm sure the fans, Ubaldo, just a quick thing. Ubaldo, just a quick thing. Don't you think the fans would have loved seeing Stan with Rosie? I mean, 6'4" Stan Smith, Rosie barely 5'1", and yet that was a real contrast.
We had a hard time doing high fives. She had to jump about 3 feet to get to my hand.
Yes, well, you won 5 slams in doubles with Bob Blatz. 4 US Open and 1 Australian Open, and plus you lost 3 finals, I think, 2 with Van Dillen maybe, and 1 with Gorman, or vice versa. I mean, 3.
Yeah, I lost. What is it, like 10 finals in singles and doubles? So.
Yeah, well, there were 8 finals in doubles, I think, that you lost in slams. But I would prefer to talk about your wins than.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, you too. And I would start because nobody, maybe, you know, in Europe especially, a win at NCAA was not considered so important. But at those times, to win the NCAA wasn't easy at all, because I've seen players like Alex Olmedo winning 56 and 58, Barry McKay winning in 57, Alan Fox, whose I was a ball boy in Florence, and I remember him because he was always playing with a sort of towel pending from his shorts.
Yeah, that's right.
And that was the first one I saw doing that. I mean, everyone else had the handkerchief in the pockets, but he had actually a towel pending from his shorts. Then I saw, you know, Rafael Ozuna winning in 62. I mean, I didn't see them, but Ralston 63 and 64, Arthur Ashe 65, Pazzarella 66, Lutz 67, and then Stan Smith winning in 68, both singles and doubles with the Lutz. And the reason also why I like to say it is because that was probably one of your first big win, I guess, one of the first. But in 1969, the NCAA was won by somebody called Joaquin Loyo Mayo from USC, and he is the only player probably of some prestige that I beat in my career. So,
Really? Is that right?
Yeah, I beat him.
Wow.
I beat him in San Luis Potosí in the Mexican tournament where he was seeded number one, because he had been for 10 years number one of Mexico. And that was my best win ever, and the only one I can recall. So while I have more than 100 tournaments about you, I just remember maybe a first or second round against Loyo Mayo. That's my...
Joaquin and I went to USC together as freshmen, and at that time, freshmen couldn't play on the varsity team. And so he and I practiced almost every single day. And so that's when I really got to learn how to play against lefties. I had a pretty good record against lefties like Laver and Roach and some of those guys. Ian Crookenden was a player at UCLA, but Joaquin and I played a lot that one year particularly because we couldn't play on the varsity team. And the other thing that's I think is interesting is I think it was around 60 or 58 or something like that when Chuck McKinley was in college and he decided not to play the NCAAs, and he ended up going to Wimbledon and won Wimbledon. And so that showed the strength of college tennis, because there's so many good players in college at the time that even a player that was still in college could win Wimbledon. In fact, Dennis Ralston won the Wimbledon doubles before he went to college as a junior. And then he went to play the junior championships in the United States and lost in the semifinals. And so he and Rafael Ozuna, who also went to USC, won the Wimbledon doubles when Dennis was only 17 or 18 years old.
Yeah, unbelievable. Well, those were really different times, because I mean, probably the last big player who won the NCAA probably was John McEnroe, I would say. You know, because then he won, I think, in '77, and then he went to Wimbledon and reached the semifinals.
Yeah, he played well. Then Connors went to UCLA before that for 1 year. And he obviously had a good career, but I think I was the last player to graduate from college to get a degree to win a Grand Slam title. Arthur Ashe won a Grand Slam title after I did, and he graduated before I did, but I think I was the last one to win.
Ashe was the NCAA in '65 and won the US Open in 1968, but I don't know if he was graduate or not.
He had graduated, but then I won in 1971 and 72, so I was the last one, I think, to win.
Okay.
Arthur did win the Wimbledon after that, so it depends upon how you look at it.
Sure. So right now, I mean, then I saw more recently in 211 Johnson won it, the NCAA, and 216 McDonald McKenzie. But I mean, it's completely different. I mean, so the college is not anymore sort of workshop to become a tennis player, to become a pro? It's changed a lot.
Well, it is one of the paths to go, and most of the players, when they go, like, I'm not sure about Johansson, how many years he went to college, but players are still going to college for a year and a half, and then, or 2 years, and then going professional if they're ready to go. Like the Bryan twins won everything in college, and then as a junior, they turned pro and obviously became maybe the best doubles players ever to play in the world. So, and McEnroe only played 1 year, Connors played 1 year, James Blake played 2 years at Harvard, or 1 year, I think it was, at Harvard, and he had a great
Then you
career.
had Stan. You had John Isner was an exception.
And John Isner went 4 years to Georgia.
Yes,
and
right.
Of course, he's been in the top 10 in the world, not winning a Grand Slam, but he's probably done the best of the latest college players.
Yeah. Listen, but we should talk about even more important wins. Where should we start, Steve? Do you want to decide where to start from?
Well, sure. I mean, we already mentioned, you already alluded Yubala to the NCAAs, but Stan, then of course, by the next year, you'd already established yourself in Davis Cup doubles with Lutz, but in '69, you won that U.S. Nationals title. And we still had a U.S. Open and a U.S. Nationals, but it meant something. Talk about that one a little bit, because I thought that was the start of what I regarded as the 5 golden years of your career, winning the Nationals in '69, the Masters, the first Masters in Tokyo in '70, the U.S. Open in '71, Wimbledon in '72, and then the WCT Finals in Dallas in '73. So start with that U.S. Nationals, because it had some importance to you, particularly as an American, prior to the U.S. Open. When both
we played the U.S. Nationals in Boston, and I played Lutz in the finals. I think Lutz beat Arthur in the semis, and I might have beaten Charlie Pasquarello, but I forget. But the finals, I played my doubles partner, who was we played a lot of times in college. We even played in the juniors. One year in the juniors, I lost to him in the May tournament in Southern California, and I won the national junior championships that year, but then came back. And if I had lost to him in the fall tournament in Southern California, he would have been ranked number 1 in Southern California. I would have been ranked number 1 in the world, in the United States, in juniors. So we played each other a lot of times in juniors, college, and then this was one of the bigger ones we played in the Pro Tour. And so that was one of the times, I think it was the next year really, that I realized that I could play against the good players. And normally there's one tournament or 1 year, or a couple tournaments in a 1 year that really will determine whether you really think in your own mind that you are one of the best players. And I think that that year when I won the Masters in Tokyo, I beat Laver and Rosewall in the Masters that year in the round robin event. And I overheard.
Show us the trophy, Stan. Show us.
Yeah, here's the trophy. Here's the Masters trophy. This is the first Masters played in Tokyo. It's the Masters now is the ATP final, but I overheard Rosewall say that I was one of the favorites. And when I heard that from Rosewall, it made me realize, well, if he thinks I'm one of the favorites, maybe I'm a pretty good player. And that was really a big turning point in my career.
Sure. And then after that, in '71, well, what happened? You won the U.S. Open, I guess.
Yeah, here's the U.S. Open. Here's the U.S. Open trophy. I actually got this 1 year ago.
Oh, why?
Believe it or not.
Why?
They didn't give you a trophy. They gave you a gold ball, and they gave you a check. And the check that I got in 1971 was $20,000 US. And so I did a book just recently, and the USTA actually gave me that trophy so I could put that in the book along with some of the other trophies.
Well, I need to get that book, because I don't have it. I have almost 500 books, I think, tennis books, and I missed yours. So I mean,
well, you should have that book.
I've got it, Mike. I picked it up at the U.S. Open last year, but and it's a keeper. It's a big coffee table book, and Stan should be proud of it, and looks back over a lot of aspects of his career, and a lot of interesting photos. I enjoyed the book, Stan, but tell us a little bit about that run through the Open in '71, when especially I mean, it was a clear path to the semis for you, and you beat Marty Reeson in the quarters, and then you had this 5-setter with Tom Ocker. It got a little scary. Ocker had been in the finals against Arthur 3 years earlier, losing in 5 sets, and now you got in a 5-setter with him after being up 2 sets. Talk about how Ocker came back and challenged you so severely.
Well, Ocker was a great player, and he's had a lot of great singles wins and even more doubles wins over the years. And he was just a couple inches away from winning some Grand Slams and being, you know, considered certainly as the best player from Holland, and certainly is one of the best players that played in the world. So
The Flying Dutchman.
The Flying Dutchman, yeah.
Yeah.
But that year I got into the finals of Wimbledon and in '71, and so I had the experience of being in the finals and knowing what it was like.
Yes, and Stan, just a brief interjection there. In that final against Newcomb, so we don't bypass that, you led 2-1, and then you made an interesting comment after the match. It was one of those rare times you felt like you actually lost concentration. Is that the way you remember it now? And was it tough? That one getting away, was that a tough pill to swallow?
Yeah, I had beaten him at the Queen's Club tournament the 2 weeks before, so I felt, you know, confident. He was seeded #1, but I felt, you know, fairly confident because I had beaten him, and I lost the first set. I won the next 10 out of 12 games, I think, in the second, third set, and so I realized I had to give a speech that night at the Wimbledon ball, so I had to start thinking about my speech, and I had to think about a song to dance with the ladies' winner. And so in the fourth set, he fell down and pretended like he broke his wrist, and it was kind of a, you know, a little fun and that sort of thing. But I really lost my momentum, lost my concentration, and he came back and won 6-4 in the fifth. And so that was one of my 4 goals, was to become a member of the U.S. Davis Cup team, to be #1 in the U.S., to win Wimbledon, and be #1 in the world. So that was really #3 and possibly #4 right there that went out the window when I lost to Newcomb in the finals. But when I got to the semis and finals of the U.S. Open, I had that experience in the background of being, you know, near the end of the tournament of a Grand Slam event, which really helps. And it was also the time when we played, it was the first or second year of the tiebreaker. And so as it turned out, I think I won all 7 of the tiebreakers that I played in the tournament. And that's an indication that you're confident, that you can, you know, play well when the pressure's really on. And I forget whether I played a tiebreaker against Ocker or not, but I did play one against Kodish in the finals. In fact, the last set was a tiebreaker. The last couple points we played, I ended up.
And Stan, before you went on to play, you told me the story, but I'd love the viewers to hear this, about running into Pancho Segura, the great wily strategist out of Ecuador, who was such a great coach later for Jimmy Connors, and he gave you some advice. Is that right?
Well, Pancho was about 5'8". He had a 2-handed forehand,
Yeah,
and a 1-handed backhand that was probably worse than yours, Steve. And he had no serve, but he could run like the wind. And he had rickets when he was young, and so his legs were bowed, but he could still run. But he had to really think his way to win tournaments. And he beat, you know, Sedgman and Gonzalez and all the guys in his era. He did it with his head, because he couldn't do it. We couldn't hit an ace, and his 2-handed forehand was the best in the world. But everything else was very average. He actually volleyed pretty well, but he moved great. But he was not a very imposing guy. So he had to think his way through matches. And he helped Connors. He helped Chang. He certainly helped me for about 3 years in high school. And then I went to see him periodically in college as well, because we were right near each other. But right before the match, he came up to me and said, "Kid, you got to do 3 things. You got to lob him when he gets too close. You got to run around, hit forehands on second serves, and you got to hit kick serves to his forehand," which was an unusual tactic because the kick serve will normally go to the person's backhand, and he had a particularly good backhand. And what happened is I served great the first set, serving really hard and right into his sweet spot for the low forehand and the backhand. And he won the set with me serving well. So then I remembered about this idea of kicking the ball to his forehand. And he had a continental forehand. He didn't like the high forehand. And so that turned out to be very helpful. And then I think in the last tiebreak, I ran around, hit 2 forehand winners on second serves. And I hit a lob, I think, over his head to win a point, to win the tiebreaker, to win the match, to win the title. So that Segura's advice, and we hadn't really seen each other for years. And he just happened to come up to me as I was walking from the clubhouse to the center court at Forest Hills. And he gave me those 3 tips to play against Kodesh.
And did you see him after the match?
Yeah, so after the match, I thanked him. I should have given 20% of my prize money. I was too stupid to do that at the time.
So listen, so that it happened in 1971, and well, you couldn't play. I think in that year you couldn't play. Did you? There was a problem with the WCT and Wimbledon. That was in the 71 or later on, because 73.
Well, it was 73 was
73
actually
the boycott.
Yeah, that was a boycott. That was the best year of my career, really. I won, I think, 11 out of 13 tournaments early in the year, 7 out of 11, something like that. And so I was playing well, and we got to Wimbledon, and we had this issue with our association with Pilic. And it was ironic because we boycotted Wimbledon because of the ruling against Pilic not being able to play because he elected not to play Davis Cup for Yugoslavia. But the ironic thing was he wasn't the most popular player on our new association. But we felt strongly about the principle of players being able to choose when and where they wanted to play. And that was a case where he had actually played WCT doubles in the doubles final, I think, and he couldn't play that Davis Cup match. And so the Yugoslavian Tennis Association was not happy, and he was not in good standing, as they would say, with his application for Wimbledon. And the Wimbledon officials said, no, well, we're not going to let you play.
So what I'm saying is that you have been a bit unlucky in few occasions. I mean, because in 73, you would have been the champion, holding champion, because you won in 72. In 73, you would have been a strong favorite or one of the top favorites, and you couldn't win it. The computer ATP couldn't start after your best year, so you were not there. I mean, then, well, I mean, you could have, you could have been more lucky in a way. I must say that I saw you first playing from live in 73 when I was in Dallas. It was my first WCT event after those 2 famous finals, Laver and Rosewall, won by Rosewall, best matches of the era, I would say. And I remember you won it, winning versus Arthur Ashe, and there was Charlton Heston, Ben Hur, who was giving the prize, and I was there. That was my first big impact with a tennis professional. Before I had been only ball boy in the Davis Cup matches in Florence, in Italy, between Pietrangeli, Girolamo, and Indians, South Africans, and but I saw my first big tournament with you winning in Dallas. Do you remember that time?
That's a good start for you. I remember Charlton Heston actually used to play at the Los Angeles Tennis Club, and he loved tennis. And he would actually a lot of times just go back in the back courts with a ball machine and hit balls. And I have to say that his potential was not very high. But you thought that he played some very big parts in movies, And it's hard to believe that Ben-Hur couldn't play tennis, but he didn't. That wasn't his strength. But he was great, and he loved tennis. He supported it, and he gave the trophy to me, and that was it was fun because I had gotten to know him a bit prior to that, so it was even more special to get the trophy from him, and that was a big event for us at the time. It was almost like winning a Grand Slam, because I think I might have beaten Laver in the semis. So it was.
And Ashim 4 sets.
Yeah, you beat Arthur, right?
Yeah.
But Stan, you're right.
Just one sec, Steve, because I have two memories about that tournament. One was that Lamarand gave a party, for Stan and his girlfriend, who became his wife. There was a big party in Dallas where I was invited. Fantastic cocktail party, I think, on the grass.
That's right.
On the green.
At his house. Yeah.
Yeah, you remember that, I guess.
I do.
And I met Marjorie for the first time. I mean, I'd never seen her before, of course.
Yeah, well, she was. That was getting close to. I think I was getting close to asking her to marry me at the time, but it was probably one of the first tournaments she had gone to that was not a women's event too, because she played herself, and we played in different events during the summertime, where there was women and men playing in events, like in Philadelphia and Cincinnati, places like that.
And then there was another memory. There was a junior tournament, under 14 or under 16, and there was a young kid called John McEnroe. And the father, Patrick, the John Senior, said, "Come and watch my son, because he's not bad." And we saw him with myself, with Vrino Tomasi and Gianni Clerici, and we were very impressed. And he was playing in the morning at the Mudi Coliseum, exactly where Stan won the tournament. So that was the first time I ever seen John McEnroe playing tennis. You remember? Maybe, I don't know.
Well, I actually, when I was dating Margie, and she went to school with John and with Patrick in the same school. And so I went to a sports day when I was dating her, and I think I just won Wimbledon. And so we went out to this school, and Mrs. McEnroe was there, and she said, "Johnny, you got to meet Mr. Smith. He just won Wimbledon." And he was literally hiding behind her skirt, and he wouldn't come out to shake hands. And so she said, "Johnny, come out and shake hands." And he wouldn't come out. Then finally she reached around and grabbed him and pulled him out, and he kind of stuck his hand out like this, put his head down, and that's when we first met. I've told that story several times with Mrs. McEnroe and Mr. McEnroe in the same room, and I was a little nervous about it because, you know, they are a little sensitive about what John has done and that sort of thing, and so they said, "No, that's exactly what happened." And obviously John went on and beat me at Wimbledon, actually, one of his first years and one of my last years. We played on the court number 1 at Wimbledon, and I actually lost to him the 3 times I played him. But that was the first time we met.
And that was the only time in his life that he has been shy.
No, that's not true. He was always very shy, except when he was on the court. Okay. It was almost like Ilie Nastase. When you wanted Ilie Nastase to say something in an interview or something like that, he would say very little. But when you didn't want him to say anything, then he'd be talking and shouting and interrupting like crazy. So John was actually pretty shy and fairly timid. And he actually dated Margie's sister quite a bit. And they didn't really date. She was just a really good friend because they grew up together. And she would listen to him when he would talk about how the press was difficult and issues that he was having. So,
Ubaldo, how could he say a thing like that? The press was difficult? We're not difficult. No, but Stan, before
it must have been just 1 or 2 people, I'm sure.
Just wanted, but we've covered so much ground, but I don't want us to forget. I think we need to just go back for a moment, Ubaldo, to 72, because we do need to see Stan's Wimbledon trophy. But before he shows it to us, I just want you to talk, Stan, about that incredibly absorbing final, fascinating final that you had with Nastase because he was never easy to play, and it was a harrowing 5-set battle. You lost the first one, the next two seemed to have control. Illy was all frantic about his rackets and talking to his cornermen and looking like he was losing it mentally. But he came back, took it into a fifth, and it went to 4-all in the fifth, love 30, and you made what might have been a lucky volley, who knows, but it was a critical point, and then eventually won 7-5 in the fifth. But talk about your memories of experiencing that really difficult duel with Illy Nastase.
Yeah, but
Well,
before that, I would like to show the book that Steve Flink, you may see it here, that he wrote the greatest tennis matches of the 20th century. And at page 123, we see Stan Smith versus Illy Nastase. So, I mean, that Steve wrote everything about that, including the fact, I think, that the match was postponed, I guess. And was it played on Sunday instead of Saturday? And then there was a ball on the evening before, and he had to dance with Billie Jean King. I read everything on Steve Flink's book. So, I mean, go ahead.
Well,
take us back there, Stan. Take us back.
If Steve wrote it, it must have been true. Sometimes the press don't get all the facts right, but I haven't read that article particularly, but I'm sure it's very accurate. But we'd played many times. Illy and we played Davis Cup 4 times, and I beat him in all 4 Davis Cup matches. We played in the Masters 3 times, Masters finals 3 times, and I think he beat me in all 3 of those, or at least 2 times. And so we had a lot of tough matches. But I think I had the fact that I had been in the final the year before really helped me, because I understood the feeling of what it was like to be in the finals of Wimbledon and the preparation. Ubaldo mentioned that I've been unlucky about things. I've actually, just the contrary, been blessed with the timing in my life and almost everything that's happened. And the year before in 71, I lost, I was up 2-1. 72, I was up 2-1. I lost a 4th set like I did in 71. I'm starting to think it's going to be like it was in 71, the final result. But it did come down to the 5th set where we were both playing well, and he was under control most of the time in the 5th set. And as Steve said, at 4-all at love 30, I reached out to try to get a passing shot that he hit, and I hit it on the wood of my racket. We used to have wood those days, and it hit the net and it rolled over. And even with it being so short, Nastase was so fast, he actually got his racket on it and missed the shot. But he actually comes up to me every once in a while, every few years. He'll say, "Oh, you're so lucky. You win. You hit let cord with wood. You do that. You don't make it, I win match." And I said, "Well, that's water under the bridge, Nasty. It's not going to change now." So I was a little lucky in that particular situation, but I was a little unlucky the year before. And but overall, as I said, I've been very lucky with my life, with my wife, my 4 kids, my 15 grandkids. The timing that's taken place over the years of how things worked out, playing Davis Cup and being able to be on a team with great players.
Stan, stop there for a second, if you would. That's more another tie into Illy, and probably your finest hour in many ways was going to Bucharest in 72. And I remember you told me when it was over, you couldn't really believe how it had all come off, and because going over there, the American team was somewhat pessimistic to play in Bucharest on clay, and you win against Nastase on the opening day. He served for the first set at 9-8, and you broke back and won the set 11-9, and then went right through in the next 2 sets. Then you won the doubles with Van Dillen the next day over Nastase and Tiriac, and then beat Tiriac 6-love in the 5th, the last day. So you almost single-handedly led the Americans to that Davis Cup win. A contribution from Van Dillen, to be sure, in the doubles. But where do you rate that Davis Cup experience among your great moments in tennis?
Well, I think that's the word, Steve, is experience. That experience was the most harrowing and difficult of my life, to to be in that situation, because it wasn't just 1 or 2 matches. It was 10 days in Bucharest when it was raining most of the time. They were watering the court even more to keep it as slow as possible. Tiriac and Nastase both predicted that the U.S. team was 10-1. The Romanians, the Romanians were 10-1 favorites to win that match, and unfortunately, most of the guys on our team believed that as well. So it was a real test for our team. Dennis Ralston was great under pressure. He had been criticized and had not only been criticized, but had not been great under pressure in his career sometimes. But he was great under pressure in that situation. And
as the captain, of course, we should tell everybody that Dennis was the Davis Cup captain. Yeah.
Dennis Ralston was the Davis Cup captain at the time.
Yeah.
And so we had about 100 people that were rooting for us out of the 4,000 or 5,000 fans. And the second day, all of our people got under the American flag, and when they introduced us, they cheered like crazy. And the Romanian fans were not happy about that. But anyway, Tiriac was really the orchestrator of the tie. I think he had most of his relatives on the line, calling lines. Enrique Morea from Argentina.
They were patriotic short sight. No, patriotic short-sighted people. I mean, they couldn't see well the lines.
Short-sighted, yes. They were having some problems with their viewing of the shots, and Tiriac reminded them at different times, I think, in Romanian that, that ball was out. Don't call that good, and so it was amazing. Plus, that we had tremendous kind of intensity around the whole event, because it was after the Munich Olympics, in which the Israeli athletes had been killed in Munich. And so we had 2 Jewish members on our team. And so we had very, very tight security. Bill and George were our 2 translators. That one guy was a karate champion of Eastern Europe. The other guy had a revolver under his jacket. And they followed us everywhere. So it was a very tense situation in that respect. And it was even more tense, if it could be, playing against Nastase and Tiriac in Bucharest on the red clay with heavy, wet balls. And Nastase had just won the U.S. Open. And so I'd won Wimbledon. He'd won the U.S. Open. They were building it up as a big match between he and I. And of course, Tiriac was, before I played him in the 4th match, they gave him a trophy. It was about 3 feet high, I think. And it was commemorating his 100th Davis Cup match. And so this was his last hurrah. We had beaten him 3 times in 68, 69, 69, 70, 71. And now we're playing them in 72 on their red clay courts. And so this was their big chance to win. And I wasn't overly confident, that's for sure. But I did realize that, I really fought hard. That's all I could do. And Nastase didn't play his best.
Yeah, Stan, the other day I spoke with Jon Tiriac, and he still remembers that. And he has never forgiven Ilie Nastase to have lost to you in 3 straight sets, because he thought that Nastase was not too serious in preparing the Davis Cup final. While for Tiriac, this was the hugest goal of his life, for Ilie had not been too serious in his opinion. For 2 years almost, Tiriac didn't want to talk anymore to Nastase. And when they were playing doubles, and they played doubles against Italy in Davis Cup in Mestre next to Venice, they were not talking to each other. They were playing doubles without talking, and it was because Tiriac couldn't forgive Nastase to have lost to you, since Nastase, actually in 1973, so the few months later, he won everything. He won Monte Carlo, he won Rome, he won Roland Garros. He won the 3 tournaments, the best tournaments on clay. And you were not favorite, as you said. And,
yeah, but Ubaldo, this was what I think made Stan's victory there to me so impressive, was that everything was working against him, the clay, the crowds. So what Stan didn't mention was that and on top of everything, Illy was very jittery, and no doubt about it. But then Tiriac was orchestrating those crowds and delaying incessantly between points and raising his arms, taking sometimes a minute between points. The line calls were outrageous, and I was there, Ubald. I was lucky enough to make that trip and be there for that incredible 3 days. And how Stan stood up amidst all this. Not to mention, Stan, what did you say to Jan when talk about what you said to Jan when it was over, because you were not happy with the way he had conducted himself on that occasion.
Well, it was in the fifth set, I got a lead, 1-love, 2-love, 3-love, and then I'm trying to think to myself, do I shake hands with Tiriac? Because it was as Steve said, he did everything he possibly could in his control to try to help them win, and so I didn't know what to do or what to say or whether not to shake hands or to walk off or whatever it was, and so I just said a few things after the match to him as we shook hands, and that was it.
What? Come on!
But you know what,
After
Ubaldo,
so many
here's the
years, you
nice.
can tell us.
But Ubaldo, I want Stan to tell the follow-up story, which I think is really remarkable, because I remember I did an interview with Tiriac a few years back. I asked him if he really I said, do you have any regrets? I was there in '72. Do you have any regrets about the way you behaved? He says, absolutely not. So that's Jan. But the flip side is that Stan and Tom Gorman went back, I believe it was a 30-year anniversary, Stan, but you went back
2002.
Tiriac invites them back to play sort of an exhibition, sort of recreating what happened in '72. And then tell the story, Stan, about how kind Tiriac was when you were leaving Bucharest to go on your next trip and how he helped you out.
Yeah, so after the match, we have they call it, I guess it'd be called a friendly in European football. And I played a set against Nasty. Tiriac and Nasty played against Gorman and I in a set. And at the end of the set, we actually switched partners. Tiriac came over on my side at 4-all in the set, and Stassi went over with Gorman. And so it was very friendly. They had fireworks along the lines. They had the national anthem played for both the U.S. and Romania. And in the party afterwards, Tiriac said, well, what are you doing? And I said, well, I've got to go to Athens to prepare for the Olympics. And he said, well, how are you getting there? I said, well, I'm got to fly to Vienna and be there for 3 or 4 hours, then fly from Vienna to Athens. It's going to take me 5 hours to get there. And he says, well, you should take my plane. I said, you're kidding. And he said, I'll organize it. So he comes back. He says, would you like to have a stewardess? And I said, of course, a beautiful stewardess would be great. And then he comes back again. He says, I can't believe I'm asking you this, but would you like coffee or tea with your breakfast? I said, I'd like to have tea, please. And so he comes back. He says, you're all set. I've got my jet. I think he had 2 pilots and this beautiful stewardess. And so I go out the next day and we drive around the Bucharest airport to a building. On the building it says Tiriac Airways. And so we drive in and I get in the plane, and it looks like it's brand new, beautiful plane. It's about an 8-seater. And I fly directly from Bucharest to Athens. And I write Tiriac a note afterwards. I said, Thierry, thank you very much for allowing me to use your plane. It was terrific, and I like to bury the hatchet. I didn't say it in his head, but I like to bury the hatchet. We didn't talk for about 2 or 3 years after that Davis Cup match. And in fact, I got this award in Paris the next day. In fact, I've got it in my trophy cabinet. It's the Unesco Award for Sportsmanship, and it was based on the match that we played in Bucharest in that Davis Cup.
You haven't shown us your your Wimbledon trophy yet.
Okay, here's the Wimbledon trophy. This is a replica of what you get when you win. If I hold it really close to the camera, it looks like the real thing. It's twice as big, but this is it's really nicely done. And actually, at that time, you got 3 trophies. You got the Renshaw Cup and the President's Cup, as well as the replica of the cup that they gave you. And they don't do that anymore, but this is a prized possession. And it was, like I said, it was the ultimate of my third goal to win Wimbledon. And then because of that, I was voted #1 in the world.
So Stan, you said you very modestly talked about feeling like you were lucky, you were fortunate, that a lot of things a lot of dreams were realized. But let's talk about what was some hard luck after that Dallas win in '73. First, the Kodesh match at the U.S. Open. You'd beaten him obviously 2 years earlier, and you play him in the semis. It's on the edge of darkness. Great match, 5 sets, a match point. You were unable to make a back-end return, and Yan got out of that and won and got to the final, loss to Newcomb. That was a really tough loss. And then the next year against Rosewall, 2 sets to love at Wimbledon, serving for the match, and then a match point in the tiebreak. So those were 2 matches. In each case, who knows? You might have won the Open in '73, and I think you would have won Wimbledon in '74 if you'd beaten Rosewall against Jimmy Connors. Looking back at that time, Jimmy hadn't won Wimbledon yet, and you were well positioned to play him on grass. So talk about those 2 hard luck experiences.
Yeah, I would like just to add. I would just like to add that Wimbledon '74 was my first Wimbledon as a journalist, and I was watching Rosewall. I mean, I remember that many people, since Rosewall had played the final in '54, losing to Drobny, everybody at that time was hoping that Rosewall would make maybe the final, and it wasn't a great final because Connors destroyed Rosewall. And I think that Stan would have been much more would have given much more of a fight to Connors in the final '74. But I remember that match point, and I'm sure Stan remembers too.
But Ubaldo, I think Stan would have had a very good chance of winning. Never mind giving him a tough. But being a servant volleyer, just the matchup totally different from Rosewall. That Stan, and I think Stan might have been pretty confident if he'd been able to finish off Rosewall. So Stan, start with that one and then go back to Kodesh if you would.
Yeah, I had actually beaten Connors in Nottingham the week before in the finals. And so I did feel pretty confident that if I could win that match against Rosewall, that I could win in the finals. But I was playing great against Rosewall and had a serve for the match at 5-3 in the third, and then had match point in the tiebreaker. I had a return that hit the top of the tape. I mean, it could have rolled over as easy as not, but that was amazing to be able to lose that match after being up 2 sets to love. So that was probably my most devastating loss. The one against Kodesh was tough too because, as you said, it was getting dark, and there was even a question of whether we should finish the match to get it 4-all or so. I think we talked about maybe coming back the next day and finishing, but we ended up, finishing that match, and Kodesh won that match. And obviously I had beaten him in '71 on not on the exact same court, because it was a side court that we played on that in in '73 we had there's 3 courts that were in the center court of Forest Hills, and so we were playing that side court. The next day would have been the finals on the center court of the Forest Hills. But anyway, that was disappointing to have to finish that match, and it's always just like Nadal and Federer are trying to finish that match in the dark. Should you finish the match or should you come back the next day?
Right.
And so it's always difficult. The players both like to finish, but they both don't want to play in the dark. So that's one of those tough decisions that have to be made.
Well, I still remember Stan so vividly, and Ubaldo, after Stan lost, not long after, you were sitting out in the clubhouse. You described that long walk from the clubhouse when you saw Segura a few years earlier, but you're on the clubhouse steps. It obviously very somber and saddened, and people were coming up to you and consoling you. I don't know if you remember that moment, but I thought it was very poignant, as a lot of people were commiserating with you over a tough loss as you sat there trying to digest it in the clubhouse.
Yeah, I don't remember that, but I do remember losing that set point and not getting the backhand return back in play.
Yeah.
Listen, Steve, I think we should now, because all people who have followed us until now have heard of a lot of memories. I mean, we went quite few years back. Now, I'd like to know now from Stan what he thinks of something more actual, like the Davis Cup. I mean, because you won it 7 times. You and Tilden are the Americans who won it more than anybody else. And of course, it was more difficult to win it at your time than at Tilden's time. How do you see, how sad, if you are sad, to see how the Davis Cup has changed? I mean, what do you see as the future of this, either new format, or there is the ATP Cup, or these team events? What do you think about this?
Well, I think that the bottom line, in my opinion, would be to combine the ATP and the Davis Cup situation. So you'd have one, nation-to-nation event. I've always, the last 20 years, a lot of the top players haven't played. Sampras didn't play, Boris Becker didn't play, Lendl didn't play. A lot of players have not played the Davis Cup, but it has still been very popular, particularly when you play in countries that have not had, let's say, the Davis Cup final or the semifinal. And so it's been a very popular national event, best of 5 sets, and it certainly represents some of my fondest memories. But I really have always felt in the last 20 years they should do it in one place. And the problem is you just have, the 4 majors. You've got a lot of other big tournaments that are out there, and they just have been jamming the Davis Cup match after the majors, and as sort of an afterthought. And a lot of the players, like I remember Agassi went to South Africa, then he flew to San Jose, and by the time he got there, he was wiped out for a few weeks, as a matter of fact. And so it's hard to ask the very top players who are in the finals of the Grand Slam events to play the very next week in a Davis Cup match situation. And so I always felt that was really hurting the Davis Cup. So I always wanted to see maybe a situation where you have everything played in one place, but this didn't turn out to be too good. And of course, it's the first year of trying it this way. And the ATP final, or the ATP Cup, turned out to be a pretty popular event with some of the rule changes and that sort of thing. So I think that in reality, in today's world, you just can't do it the way it was done before, because of, we used to go to the event, we used to go to the site like in Romania, we got there 10 days in advance. So that means you didn't play the week before, you didn't play the week of, then if you had to play a tournament the next week, you'd have to fly maybe all over the world to go to the next place. And so it'd take 2 to 3 weeks of your calendar, and there's just so many events on the calendar now, and it's difficult to do that, especially best of 5. So I think the bottom line is that you combine those 2 events into something significant that the players all really feel strongly about, they all support, and you've got it. But
Stan, the other thing in the mix, though, is, of course, Labor Cup. What do you do? That's a 3rd one, and they're trying to give it some status. How do you feel about Labor Cup?
Yeah, again, the Labor Cup has been a very popular event, and the players have gotten into it. The idea of having the players helping coach along the way really is appealing to the fans and special to the players, the other players on the now that's international, so you've got a mixed group. So I don't think you can merge that with those other 2 of just nation to nation playing against other nations. But I think that event has been great. I think you could have 2 events like that. That's an international mixture, which has been great. And then you've got the nation to nation event that would be the Davis Cup situation. So that's the way I would see it. But like I say, the biggest problem is scheduling, and it's always been a problem, to be quite honest. When I was a member of the Pro Council representing the ATP, that was always our biggest thing, is what is the schedule going to be, and how do you fit all these tournaments in around the world? And unfortunately now we're seeing, tournaments, especially the lower tournaments, struggling with, meeting the prize money and getting sponsors to do those events, the 250s and the 500s, and even the 1000s. Some of them are struggling a little bit. So you know, again, the schedule's even more difficult now to make sure you've got viable events for enough players to make the tour successful.
So Stan,
sorry, Steve, do you see a future? I mean, that ATP and ITF find an agreement, or it's with these politics and these different powers, it's almost impossible?
It's difficult. Like I said, I was in the pro council, the very first one. We had 3 representatives from the ATP, 3 from the ITF, and 3 from the tournaments. And you know, the ITF members had been there forever. The ATP members were voted on every couple of years, and even the tournament representatives were changing a bit as well. So the ITF really was the elephant in the room, and they more or less had the continuity of the same people, and they were controlling the major events. Not only the Grand Slam events, but Rome and Hamburg and all those events that are national events. The ITF was really controlling those events. So it takes a visionary from several sides of the ATP and the ITF to get this working together. And there's got to be a compromise. And the ITF's got to give up some power. The ATP has got to realize that you know, they've got a pretty good deal with the prize money that's been out there and the events, but in reality, it's the players and the TV and the fans that really control the shots. And without the players, you've got no tournaments, no TV, and without the TV, you've got no sponsorship and prize money. So it's got to be a combination of those things. And the ITF they control the Grand Slams, and so and the Davis Cup and the Fed Cup, and so those are the biggest events on the calendar, and they jam those things in where they want to, and then the ATP has to fill in, and that's been the issue. I think the last 10 or 20 years, or even longer than that. I mean, like I said, back when I was in the 70s, that was a problem of figuring out the calendar.
So Stan, speaking of the calendar, speaking of current day, and Ubaldo's got you going, you had some interesting views on what Ubaldo just asked you regarding the tour and the team events, et cetera. What about your taking over from Tony Trabert and becoming president of the International Tennis Hall of Fame? A lot of people are not that aware of what you're doing there. Clue them in a little bit about what it was like to succeed Tony and what you feel you've been able to accomplish over the years in that role.
Well, I like to say that the International Tennis Hall of Fame includes arguably all the great players that have ever played the game. And we've gone back to the antiquity of the game and gotten players that played in 1890 and that sort of thing. And so we've now included everybody. And so we're going from here to the future of the new players that have been retired for 5 years. Unfortunately, the International Tennis Hall of Fame, the Hall of Fame concept is not. There's no Hall of Fame in Italy. There's no Hall of Fame in Spain. There's not even a Hall of Fame in England. There is one in Canada. There's one in Australia. But those are the only countries that have had traditionally understood the concept of a Hall of Fame. And so our goal the last 5 years particularly is to try to make the Hall of Fame, the International Tennis Hall of Fame, recognized around the world. And that is a very difficult and expensive thing. We're trying to honor the players from the different countries in their country with a dinner of some sort or a recognition on the court, a court that is significant to them, like a Marismo at the French. We presented a ring to her, Jim Courier at the French. We've had different players have been feted in different either dinners or on different venues that they have been significant to them. So we're trying to get the world to understand the significance of this. Not only the players, but contributors like you, Steve, that have been involved in the game for so many years, that have done so much for the game. So we have a lot of those contributors involved, and now we have, in the last, I guess, 6-7 years, we've got wheelchair players. And so those players are now in the Hall of Fame as well. So that's been our goal the last 5 or 6 years, is to make it international, to try to promote it so that people all around the world understand the significance. And when a player comes and is inducted in the Hall of Fame, which takes place in Newport this year, it's not going to take place for the first time in many years because of the COVID. We're going to honor those players next summer in the 21st, 2021. So that is that's been our goal, is to make it very popular. When those players get inducted, they are very emotional because they realize that they are in a fraternity with the greatest players that have ever played the game. And, a guy like Sampras, who was automatic, he knew he was going to be inducted in the Hall of Fame because of his record. But when he got there and he saw the museum and the displays and the comments of players like, Budge and Perry and Sedgman, and then going to Newcomb and Laver and on all these great players. Pietrangeli.
Yeah, we can't leave him out.
Johnny.
We have only two Italians, Pietrangeli and Clerici. So I mean, I'm supporting my compatriots. How many? Can I ask how many non-American are inside the Hall of Fame, International Hall of Fame? Do you have an idea? I mean, because most of, I guess, they are Americans, because at the beginning the International Hall of Fame was mostly Americans. Then you started to accept and put up also a lot of non-Americans. Do you know more or less how many they could be?
I did know that percentage, but the percentage is growing dramatically as to non-Americans that are in the Hall of Fame. Okay. And certainly now in the last 20 years, we're seeing more and more, non-Americans that are in the Hall of Fame. So it's, like I say, I think we've gone back to, English players, Australian players particularly, and a few South American players that have been the greatest players to play the game. And so, it really was, the game was dominated by English and American and Australian players, back in the early 20th century. So, like I said, we have got now, arguably again, the greatest players that have ever played internationally around the world. And so sure. I feel good about that. And there are some players that are borderline that have not been, that are never going to be, selected in the Hall of Fame. But if you look at the list, it's pretty impressive. And you got Fred Perry in there, who's been one of the great, the great players, and Bunny Austin. That there are players that were not too well known, early on in the 50s and 60s, or 40s, 50s, and 60s, that were not, great players. But we are now very strict with our the criteria to qualify for the Hall of Fame, in the players and even the contributors as well.
Listen, I would go for the last minutes, because I don't want to keep you busy the whole morning for you. But I would like to first of all to remind the people that your second name, Stan Roger Smith. So there is another Roger right now that is doing pretty well. So I'd like to know, what do you think about this other Roger? And also I was checking all the records. They're always talking about the Goat, the greatest of all times. And apart from those players who won the Grand Slam in 1 year, the only one who was able in men's tournaments to win 4 or 5 slams in a row, it was Novak Djokovic. And that's a record which nobody seems to pay attention enough. They are always considering 20 slams for Federer, 19 for Nadal, 17 for Djokovic, but he has been the only one, like Serena in the women and Martina Navratilova in the women, the only one who was able to win, the slams, even if not in a calendar year. What is your idea about the best record that Goat and Roger and Djokovic and Nadal?
Well, it's hard to compare different generations. We got Laver, who's won the Grand Slam twice,
Sure.
and of course Budge. But and if you, I look at my six that I like to talk about, are includes Roger and Novak and Rafa, and then I put in there Sampras, Borg, and Laver as a sixth in my list. So there are other great ones, the Connors and McEnroe and others, but that's my list. And I always I've been thinking of Federer as a guy that's the GOAT right now. But Novak is, as you mentioned, has won all four in a row, and not necessarily the same year, but he has shown that he's the number one player in the world right now. And his commitment to the game of doing everything he possibly could to get ready, to prepare for matches is, well, it's not unmatched, because you look at Nadal, you look at Federer, they're doing the same thing. And, Nadal makes the game look difficult. Federer makes the game look easy, and Novak is somewhere in between. And you got Nadal, unfortunately, not being able to play the French. Hopefully, he will play the French this year, and he will be able to play and defend his title and win another title. But when Borg is one of the guys on my list, and when I saw him win 6, I said, no one's ever going to be a better clay court player than Bjorn Borg. And of course, Nadal was blowing him out of the water, winning twice as many French championships and even more clay court tournaments. And so, Novak is, he's younger. He's the youngest of those three, a little bit younger than Nadal, and he's going to have a chance to play some more. He looks relatively healthy. Nadal, you never know about his body. And like I said, he makes the game look hard. He just works so hard, and he punishes his body so much. And Federer's been able to float around and keep his body in pretty good shape, although I guess he's got a knee injury now and knee surgery, so he's not going to play. And his chances of winning another tournament, Grand Slam, are minimal. But Novak could go down, when all is said and done, as the GOAT.
Stan, how important is it that Novak, coming from way back against both Roger and Rafa, has a winning record against both and will almost certainly retire with a winning record against both? How do you weigh that, since they've all achieved so much in majors? And as your father said, Djokovic in 15 and 16 won those 4 in a row, which first since Laver to do it. But what about him having a winning record over both Roger and Rafa?
Yeah, that really is a telling statistic. And, being number one in the world for, several years. Sampras was number one, I think, for 6 or 7 years in a row.
Yeah, six. Yeah, that's right.
6 years in a row, which is very difficult to do. And Federer's done that, and Djokovic is now doing it. So that record against each other, I mean, Nadal's game style is just is not good for Federer. And Djokovic has shown that he can play on any surface, and does have the winning record against Federer. And the thing that bothers him the most is that wherever they play, even if they played in Serbia, I think that the fans would be about 50-50 for Federer, because he's so popular around the world. I mean, he's like he's playing.
Have you ever seen anything like that, Stan? Stan, have you ever
seen? He's got a home court advantage. Well, you look at. Laver was well liked. Emerson was actually one of these guys that was so well liked by everybody, because he just was a terrific player on the court. There's no controversy with him. And Arthur Ashe was really well liked all around the world, no matter where he played. He didn't have the dominant record that these guys did, but it is it's just personality that comes across on the court, with Federer being relatively, gracious to his opponents, no matter what the situation is, and Novak being a little more of a fighter, a little bit like Connors in a way, where he shows his emotions a bit more, and kind of bravo for how great he is, and I think people get a little bit annoyed with that, where you don't see that quite as much with Federer. at the same time, it's very interesting that Novak has a tremendous sense of humor. And when he used to imitate players, he did a great job. The players hated it, and he doesn't do it anymore. But when he did that, he's got a great sense of humor. So it doesn't come across well on the court, and that's going to haunt him. Maybe as you get older. Vic Sasius once told me, he says, you're really going to be well liked when you're young and when you're really old. And in between, if you're the champion, you're probably not going to be well liked. And Federer has sort of been contradictory to that theory, but most other players, they want to see the young guy or the old guy, win. And if you're the champion, they want to see somebody. I particularly like to see the champion win. And I said it about Tiger Woods, about Jack Nicklaus, about other sports, Tom Brady, because I know what it takes to win, to be a champion. And to do that and to do it again and again is really, really difficult. So I usually, when I see a contest, I'm actually rooting for the favorite to see if we can, make history. And that's what these three guys are trying to do right now.
So when Patrick Muratoglu is saying that tennis lacks personalities, or he's afraid that he's going to lack personalities, and he wants to change the game, what is your reaction to that? Do you consider that tennis or something else, just played with the tennis rackets?
Well, I think that you have to be true to yourself, and I remember seeing Chang play Edberg, which are probably two vanilla characters in the game. At the U.S. Open, I don't know if it was a final, the semifinal, but
semifinal. Yeah, that was the semi stand. Yeah, 1992.
The fans, I don't know, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, Steve, but the fans were really into it. It was, both these guys were not trash talking. They weren't, unbelievably emotional. They were into it. They were emotional in their own right, but the fans got behind it, and it was a tremendously popular match, in my opinion. It just sticks in my mind. Yeah. And these are two guys that if you say to Chang, okay, you got to act like McEnroe, or you say to Edberg, you got to act like Boris, that's just not in their character. And so I think you can't manufacture, personalities in different people. And the worst thing you can do is to try to do something that's not just basic in your personality on the court. You got to just, you got to be who you are. And that's what's happening. And when you see that, and you see someone who really wants to win, then I think that emotion is there, and the fans can see it.
Yeah, well, of course, it was a big contrast of style between Edberg and Chang. You couldn't find two more different players in the way of playing, so that also
helps. That really helps. You got McEnroe and Borg. Two contrasting styles, and obviously Borg was as controversial as you could imagine, but he was fun to watch, and so that. Again, you have to be who you are. That's the bottom line, in my opinion.
Okay. Anyway, I will ask probably commission to Novak Djokovic, because even now during the Adria Cup, which is playing in the Balkans, he's only saying not too bad, which is something that he started to say, answering a question of mine when I did ask him, oh, you won 17 slams, you won 8 Australian Open in a row. He started laughing and saying, not too bad, pretending to use my Italian accent. And so now he's using a not too bad like a label. And I want to get also a commission from you, Stan, because you must know that my son and my daughter, they all wear Stan Smith shoes. And here I have one example, So here you can see, so I don't know, I think you owe me at least 50 cents. Because apparently I've made more than 100 million shoes. I mean, not you, but I mean, Adidas with you, thanks to you and to Donald Bell. So, I mean, when you see me, I hope you give me 50 cents.
I'll I'll give you $1 for one for each, 50 cents for each child. But it shows good upbringing, good fathering, and you raised some nice children to have good taste in style. So I'm glad to see that, and hopefully all their friends are following in their lead.
Okay.
I do have an interesting shoe. Maybe your kids would like to see this shoe.
Oh my God.
Look at that
Cool.
one.
Oh, well, you showed us a lot of trophies. I mean, is this almost as important as Wimbledon, US Open, and Tokyo ATP finals, or not? Not
This was done by a graffiti artist from Athens, Greece, and he puts Athens here. He did this one for me, and his name, he goes by the name of B. And then this is another one I always liked. This is a clog, a Dutch clog that,
wow, fantastic.
looks like my shoe. And so
Wow.
the fun thing has been there have been all sorts of different styles, different materials, different colors, different designs.
Well,
and,
you can imagine that as a father, I had to explain to my children who was Henri Lacoste, who was Fred Perry. And I went today, I said, look, I had to talk with Stan Smith. My daughter said, oh, the man of the shoes. I said, well, I mean, actually did something else. I mean, then I told them that my father with my mother, they were watching the finals in Wimbledon when you won versus Ili Nastasia. I was watching on TV, but my parents were in Wimbledon and they came back because I think you saved no, you canceled the match. No, you didn't save a match point, but Nastasia saved the match point, and then you won it anyway, 7-5 in the fifth. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, Nastasia saved a couple of match points, and
yeah,
that that's why I wrote the book. And Steve can show you the book, but it's the name of the book is Stan Smith's "Some People Think I'm a Shoe."
All right.
So,
you need it in your library. It's time we get it in your library.
But I want it with the signature of Stan together with the $1 that he owes me.
Okay.
I will pay the book, but I mean,
okay.
Okay.
You buy the book and I'll give you the $1.
All right. Okay, I'll do that. Promised. Listen, I think we went long time. I hope I didn't. I hope you had fun. I mean, because I would talk to you for hours, but then Steve too. But you're a very busy man. You have the Hall of Fame to take care and many other things. 4 children. Do they play tennis? Those 4 children, I think 2 they were playing quite good.
Yeah, actually, all 4 of them played in college, and 3 of them were captains of their college team. And one of them played professional tennis for about a year. Then he hurt his shoulder and had to stop the pro tour, but he's been a coach at Duke University for the last 10 years, the head coach, and so he's still involved in tennis. And the others still like to play occasionally. And then we got these 15 grandchildren that hopefully they're all very, very young now. So
Do you still play yourself or not?
Well, I have an academy, the Smith Stearns Tennis Academy here at Hilton Head. We started in 2002. And so we have about 50 kids there that play, and our goal is to get them a college scholarship at a school that's appropriate for them academically as well as athletically, tennis-wise. And so I hit a few balls with those kids sometimes.
Listen, thanks a lot. I really want to thank you very much, also because you have been especially very patient to bear Steve Flink for all these years, and today especially. I mean, it's tough, I mean, it's sometimes he will talk about results from the first minute to the last one. So I mean, but at least he remembers them all. That's.
He's got an encyclopedia. He doesn't have to have an encyclopedia. He's got one, but right above his shoulders.
Thanks, Stan.
Okay.
Thank you.
So that's all for today. Thanks. I'm sure that the Ubi Tennis followers will like it. I will have to work a lot to do the transcripts in Italian, Spanish, and for all what we said, but it was a pleasure, and thanks for joining us.
I'm sorry I couldn't do this in Italian, but anyway.
Well, maybe you can say spaghetti in Italian. No?